If you ever feel like history couldn't get any dumber, just remember there was a whole era where a cramp and a strong opinion could get you executed. No, seriously. From the 1400s to the 1700s, Europe and eventually America basically said, burn her. She looks like she reads. It was the original cancel culture, except instead of losing followers, you lost your actual life. These weren't people with potions and flying brooms. These were just women who didn't smile enough. And the wildest part, the whole thing kicked off because two insecure church dudes wrote a book saying women were Satan's side chicks. The book popped off and boom, we got centuries of people running around yelling witch like it's a TikTok trend. Over 100,000 people were accused, tens of thousands murdered, and what were the crimes? Being old, being single, owning a cat, Jesus Christ, making tea, helping women give birth without dying. Like, imagine that, delivering a baby safely and the reward is public execution. Meanwhile, the guy who can't read without moving his lips get to be the judge. So no, this was not about magic. It was about misogyny with branding. Let's dig into the dumbest gender-based genocide in history, one suspicious period at a time. You know who really got smoked in a witch hunt? Smart women. If you were a midwife, herbalist, healer, or just a woman who read books without a man explaining them to you, you were basically public enemy number one. Let's be real. If you had a uterus and a useful skill, you were a walking indictment. Especially if that skill involved keeping other women from dying in childbirth, or God forbid, easing period pain. The church looked at these women like, wow, you saved the life of the plant. It must be Satan. Meanwhile, they were out here bleeding people with leeches like that made any sense. And don't get me started on midwives. They helped women give birth, which was already a death-defying act back then. And instead of statues, they got shackles. That's not medicine. That's male fragility with a robe on. And remember, this was all happening while the church and the state were trying to consolidate power. So eliminating women who held communal knowledge, that was just one step in building a patriarchy that could last 600 years. These weren't witches. These were walking encyclopedias with hips. And burning them wasn't about fear. It was about erasing power, one talented woman at a time. Now let's talk about the Malleus, a book whose name sounds like it should summon a demon, and honestly, it kinda did. Published in 1487, it was written by Heinrich Kramer, a Dominican friar who clearly needed therapy, a hobby, and maybe a hug. Instead, he wrote a 200-page roast of women. The Malleus wasn't just anti-witch, it was anti-woman in general. It claimed that women were, quote-unquote, more credulous, more impressionable, and more likely to be witches because they were, quote-unquote, weaker in faith and more carnal. In short, hey bro, witches be emotional. This dusty fanfic wasn't peer-reviewed. The church literally dismissed Kramer for being too crazy. This guy still went rogue, self-published, and got rich off mass hysteria. It became the go-to manual for centuries of witch trials. If you get persecuted in the 1600s, someone had this dog-eared in their cloak pocket. It taught men how to identify, torture, and execute women they didn't like. Which again, was often just women who were confident, single, or good with a mortar and pestle. So yeah, the Malleus, it was the original incel manifesto. Let's stop calling it a witch craze, like it was some quirky phase Europe went through between plague and poetry. This was gendered genocide. We're talking 40,000 to 60,000 executions across Europe, and up to 90% were women. Not sorcerers, not cult leaders, just women. Midwives, herbalists, widows, poor women, outspoken women, anyone who didn't fit the mold. And in many cases, witch was just shorthand for woman who made me uncomfortable. In some villages, men would accuse their own wives. Hey babe, why is this soup so good? It must be the devil. Like, yo, this is insane. And torture wasn't just allowed, it was encouraged. They believed real witches couldn't feel pain. So if you screamed, you were faking. And if you didn't scream, you're definitely a witch. Heads, they win. Tails, you die. And once accused, your odds of surviving were microscopic. Because the real goal wasn't justice. It was control. Control over land, over labor, over legacy. To wipe out generations of women's knowledge and say it was for God. The irony? Most of the accusers were dudes who believed cats were demonic and that bathing opened your soul to Satan. So let's kill this myth right now. They just didn't know better back then. Nah, people knew it was wrong. In fact, many scholars, lawyers, even priests called out the witch trials as nonsense while they were happening. Reginald Scott wrote an entire book in 1584 saying it was all superstition. Guess what happened? The king banned it. Because truth is dangerous to power, especially when that power rests on fear. These weren't superstitious villagers running wild. These were highly organized state and church systems using fake science and religious dogma to justify gendered violence. They published manuals like the Malleus basically as a how-to guide for persecuting women. It wasn't mass delusion, it was policy. You don't accidentally burn thousands of women alive across a continent. That takes paperwork. So let's stop pretending this was a harmless quirk of history. This was an institutional campaign targeting women under the guise of saving their souls. Shit, where have we heard that one before? Every system of corruption used the same fucking playbook. I copy paste. The witch hunts may have ended, but their echoes didn't. By the 1700s, the trials slowed down, not because people got more enlightened, but because power shifted. Science rose, the church lost a little grip, and Enlightenment thinkers asked inconvenient questions. But the damage was done. Generations of women's knowledge, healing, midwifery, spiritual leadership was wiped out. Entire traditions were lost, communities scarred, and misogyny, that part didn't go anywhere. The logic of the witch hunts just got rebranded. Women were still punished for being too loud, too smart, too single, too old. They were locked up in asylums, written off as hysterical, denied education, autonomy, and rights for centuries after. Even today, when a woman speaks out, she's still called a witch online. The fire's digital now, but the spark's still the same. So yeah, the witch hunts weren't just superstition. It was patriarchy chasing down women with pitchforks.